Hey, what's going on? Jake here with Uncommon EDC, and today we're taking a first look at a brand new model from Jack Wolf Knives, the After Hours Jack. This model is going to be dropping December 15th, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, if you're here in the States. Now, if you're outside of the United States, check with your Jack Wolf Knives retailer that you usually purchase from. Those times may vary slightly. But I will put the drop details as well as a link to a list of authorized dealers in the description of this video. But back to the After Hours Jack. Super excited about this model. That's because this is the second ever locking model from Jack Wolf Knives. The first, of course, was the Gunslinger Jack that debuted earlier this year at Blade Show Atlanta. And I did pick this one up at the show in Purple Haze. Absolutely love this knife. Has a lot of similarities, obviously, both being their only two locking models. Front flipper, multiple deployment methods, bolster lock, and pocket clip. And so a lot of similarities, but very different designs as far as the handles go, very different blade shapes, but still love this one. Now, when I think of Jack Wolf Knives, obviously modern slip joints are always going to be their bread and butter, so to speak, but ever since this model released, there's been a ton of demand for either a re-release of the Gunslinger Jack or a new locking model. So I think the After Hours Jack is going to be incredibly popular. Now, before I put this one away, I did want to mention this is based off of one of his slip joint patterns. So the Gunslinger Jack is based off of the Sharpshooter Jack, and very similarly, the After Hours Jack is based off of one of his slip joint patterns, the Midnight Jack. And so if you already have the Midnight Jack, you can kind of get an idea of what to expect in terms of the design, overall form and function of the knife. Obviously, there were some changes made to accommodate the new deployment methods, the lock, the pocket clip, even the size is a little bit different, but definitely gonna have a similar feel, obviously being based off of that design. Now, as usual, we have 5 variations releasing on this drop in December 15th, and I'm gonna start by showing mine just so we have something visually interesting to look at on the screen, and then we'll talk about those other options. So I went with the Kirinite offering, and this time around the Kirinite is a toxic green, which I think looks absolutely incredible, especially paired with this DLC coating that we have on our bolster, our hardware, our blade, and even our pocket clip. You can see the backspacer is anodized in a complementary green, not identical to what we have on the covers, but I think they look really good together, especially when you look at that sandwich that it kind of creates, so where it goes from that toxic green to the black DLC coating to that green anodized, really kind of fresh and minty looking green on the spine, back to the DLC and back to the toxic green. And so looks really good. As I'm looking at it in the viewfinder, the color looks a little bit different on the viewfinder than it does in person. So we'll see what that looks like in the upload, but either way, this green seems to change depending on how the light hits it. Really cool effect there. Now let's also get this deployed. I'm going to use the front flipper, but there's a bunch of different deployment options. Let's get this deployed before we start talking about those different cover options. So front flipper works extremely well. Really enjoy that. If you're someone who's more into the slip joint side of the world, that may be a little bit foreign to you, but there's plenty of other deployment options. Now, as far as the other variations being released, there are 4 others, 5 in total as usual. We got a really nice mix. Ben does a great job of not only selecting the materials, but trying to mix it up so there's a little bit of variation. So if you don't like one, there's a good chance you'll like one of the others. So obviously first up we have the Kirinite, but then we have 2 fat carbon offerings as well. The first fat carbon option is called Frost, new one for Jack Wolf Knives. Looks really cool. It's a blue and white blend, and by itself looks great. And when you pair it with the anodization on the backspacer, on the pocket clip and or plug, it really ties everything together and makes an excellent looking knife. Had I not went with the Kirinite, that's probably my second choice. After that, we have another fat carbon offering, the Purple Haze, which we saw on the Gunslinger Jack. May have been a more natural choice for me had I not gone with the Kirinite, but obviously went a different direction. Purple Haze looks great, obviously one I chose in the past, and you can see what that anodization is going to look like on that backspacer and pocket clip. Love the Purple Haze. Then we have 2 different titanium offerings, a smooth titanium that's DLC coated, and you can kind of imagine what that would look like if you look at this without the covers. And so going to be blacked out everything. Our hardware, our pocket clip, our handle, and our blade are all blacked out. I think that's probably the coolest looking option, just has that cool factor of being entirely blacked out. Did that on the Vampire Jack and think it looks excellent. last but not least, we have a jig titanium offering. That one is not DLC coated and has a hand satin finish on the blade. Really, really great looking as well. I've been meaning to get a jig titanium model as well as a wood cover model for a while now. It just seems like every time one's released, there's one or two other options that I like just a little bit more. So haven't done that yet, but that's definitely something that I plan to pick up in the future. And then outside of that, of course, we have the Kirinite model. Now that we've gone through all those, do want to take a second to admire the Kirinite. It looks incredible. One thing with Kirinite is that each one's going to be unique and different, and so no two knives are going to be exactly the same. I think I got an excellent example of this Kirinite. Not a ton of black on my show side, but a really prominent swirl right in the center that I think looks really good. And if we flip over to that pile side, I'm not sure if it's still called a pile side on a locking knife, but I'm going to call it the pile side or non-show side. Really, really cool look on this one as well. It is being obstructed a little bit by that pocket clip, but I love the blacks on this one. I think it makes it a really unique and cool pattern. And so really good covers on both sides. Did want to take just a second to show the other two Kirinite offerings from Jack Wolf Knives, because I do have all of them so far and plan to stay current. If there's more Kirinite that comes in the future, that's what I will be getting. And so the first one he released was the purple Kirinite. I don't know if there was a specific name for it, but it's obviously purple on the laid back jack. This one also has the DLC coated bolster hardware and blade. No pocket clip on this one because it is a slip joint model, and also really excellent covers. Now the purple is a much darker color. I also have a lot more black on pile side cover, and so has a really sinister look to it. I think the toxic green one has a more like hypnotic look. This one has a more like sinister look, similar to like Venom is what it reminds me of from Spider-Man. And so I think that looks really cool. Also obviously very similar overall look. Now the next one was the Little Bro Jack, and for my review sample I got the Flow Party. Love that one. I think it looks incredible. It's a fat carbon offering and UV reactive. I showed that in the video. Just a really, really cool offering. But like I said, really want to stay complete on the Kirinite collection. So at California Custom Knife Show, I bought the Crystal Lake Kirinite version of the Little Bro Jack. And so this one's been in some other videos, but was not in my initial Little Bro Jack video. You can see this Kirinite looks very different from our other two. It's not that swirly pattern. It's more like a speckled kind of random pattern, but it looks really excellent. Almost like waves crashing minus the white foam. And so just kind of a darker, eerie look again. And I think that looks really cool. Crystal Lake seems very, very appropriate for these covers. And the only one that is not DLC coated, so has a much more traditional feel than the other two offerings. We can look at those all side by side before I get these out of the way and get back to the After Hours Jack. Now, as far as this knife goes, really kind of a larger offering from Jack Wolf Knives, which I like. As far as a locking knife goes, it's kind of got that perfect size going for it. 7.31 inches overall. 4.16 inches of that are in our handle, and so I'm able to get all 5 fingers on here and pretty comfortably. I can spread out very easily, so if you have larger hands, that should not be an issue. But really, really comfortable ergos on this. That pocket clip disappears behind these two knuckles. You can see the well-centered pocket clip here, and very comfortable on that first grip. Now, worth noting, I just got this in today. I've had it for 5 or 6 hours at this point. I'm not going to be able to say, you know, with hard use, you're going to get a hot spot here or here, because I've only cut paper with this so far. But that initial feeling in hand does feel good so far. If that changes, I will update that in a few months when I do the update video on this one. But have some jimping along the spine that's very, very effective. That's one thing, for whatever reason, I've been super nitpicky about jimping lately. And this one is very, very effective. Locks your thumb in really nicely there. And so like the jimping on this one quite a bit. 3.15 inches on that blade. We have S90V like we've been seeing from his newer models. Really have been impressed with S90V so far. Nice sheepsfoot style blade and a little swedge at the tip here. Fuller or nail nick, long pull, whatever you want to call that, is ambidextrous. So we see that mirrored on both sides. Generous sharpening choil and really, really nice hollow grind. Comes to a very thin point at that tip. You can see nice and thin. I think it feels a little bit thicker than our Gunslinger Jack, but not significantly so, and I can actually verify that as my calipers are broken, but does seem to be just a hair thicker at the tip than the Gunslinger Jack, but that might be my imagination. So we'll see there. But ergos on it, like I said, are really excellent. 2.8 ounces, so super lightweight, really nice size to weight ratio. And yeah, love that hollow grind that we see on all the Jack Wolf knives. One thing that's kind of worth noting, although not as kind of significant on this model, I guess, is that we do have titanium hardware throughout. That includes our pivot. So on this model, on the DLC coded model, not going to be super relevant because their hardware is also DLC coded. But on the other 3 models, that does mean that you can anodize that hardware if you want to. So that's definitely a nice touch. Now we have this lock bar with plenty of access. It's a bolster lock on the covered models. So the fat carbon models and the Kirinite both have a bolster lock. Both of the titanium ones have a frame lock. Now function wise, it's going to be identical, but you just have a little bit less access to that lock here. And so you can see the locket bar itself is pretty slim, so it only takes up about 1/3 of the bolster, which is important because that means you can get your fingers on here without impeding that lock and kind of preventing you from flipping these open. Even if you're left-handed, there's plenty of access to get your fingers on the bolster and stay off of that lock. So that was definitely an intentional choice and really well designed. But that lock works well, really clean action on this, super smooth. You can put skiff bearings on this. I think it uses the same ones as the gunslinger jack, which are sold on the Jack Wolf Knives website, but don't quote me on that. Definitely verify before you buy them because I would hate to have you buy them and then them not fit on this model. But I believe it's the same skiff bearings, but yeah, double check me there, check my work. And so as far as deployment, tons of options. We already saw that front flipper, and that works really well. I like the front flipper quite a bit. For people coming from the slip joint world, that may seem a little bit just foreign and just kind of weird, but I did want to show that next to the gunslinger jack front flipper because they're similar but different. It's a very different design. They have a very similar feel to them though, as far as using the front flipper. Now the detent on my after hours jack does feel a little bit heavier than my gunslinger jack, but that could be just variation between each knife. Maybe other after hours jack have a lighter detent, but it does seem a decent bit heavier than my gunslinger jack, and I like the action on both of them. But if you're someone who prefers a heavier detent, that does seem to be the case with mine. Now as far as other deployment methods, we can go with the other super modern deployment, which is the Spidey flick. So this ambidextrous spooler, again, you can do it left-handed or right-handed, allows you to get your nail in there, and this is the same thing with the gunslinger jack, which makes it very fun to be able to Spidey flick this open. Again, that detent feels a little bit heavier, but very satisfying flick, very consistent, very easy to do, even if you're not great at Spidey flicking. So that's definitely a fun one. Now, if you're coming from that slip joint world, want something a little bit more traditional, you can use this as a nail nick or a long pull and just pinch grip it or put your nail in there and open this two-handed, no problem whatsoever. Going to be just as smooth and just as satisfying. And then the last deployment method is if you want to slow roll this. So that fuller does allow you to just kind of shove the meat of your thumb into there and you can slow roll this open. Again, incredibly smooth. I like all of the different deployment methods on this, and I'm sure there's something that will work for you. What I also like is even though it has those 4 different deployment methods, none of them are obtrusive. Sometimes you have too many deployment methods, but the front flipper is so subtle and everything else is incorporated with the design of the knife where you don't notice it. So it's not like you have a front flipper, a button lock, a thumb stud, all of these different things in the way. It's a very subtle and well thought out design, but gives you tons of different options for opening it up, which I really appreciate. Now, one other thing worth mentioning is there was some feedback on the gunslinger jack that there was a sharp corner, and he took that feedback and made some changes with the after hours jack to prevent that. And so you may be able to see it on camera, hopefully that is picking up, but this corner of the cover is chamfered. And so obviously on the titanium models, they have the lock bar that doesn't even exist, but on all 3 cover versions, we have very subtle chamfering there that's gonna make it a nice rounded edge, no sharp point on there whatsoever. Now that wasn't really an issue for me on the gunslinger jack. I think just because of the placement of my fingers. When I grab this knife, and most knives, I like to be right up behind the blade. As close as I can get to the blade with my index finger, the better. And then if I have room, I spread out a little bit. And so so what that means on this knife is that you can see no finger is really sitting on that corner cover. And so I don't really feel it. I don't really feel it when I'm engaging the lock. And so non-issue for me, but was a real issue that multiple people mentioned, it being kind of a sharp corner, a little bit of a hot spot. And so he took that feedback and knocked it back a little bit. So definitely appreciate when knife makers are listening to their customers and taking that feedback and implementing that in future models. So did want to point that out as well. Now, this is a locking model, so we have a pocket clip. Most of his models don't have a pocket clip because most traditional slip joints don't have pocket clips. And so for a lot of people that are after the locking model, they're just going to leave that there. But if you're coming from that slip joint world, you may want to remove that. You do have to disassemble the knife to access that pocket clip. You can see there's no screws outside of the knife. And there's an instructional video on his site on how to do that, but it should be pretty straightforward. This is a locking knife. If you've ever disassembled a frame lock, a bolster lock, anything like that, it's all pretty similar overall. So instructional videos are out there on his website if you need them, but you can swap these out. And he does include the pocket clip, or the plug for that pocket clip space. And so what that means though is that we're not getting a leather slip, and that's because 80% of the people that buy this are probably going to leave that pocket clip intact and not use a pocket slip. So it would be almost wasteful to send out a bunch of slips that aren't going to be used. I believe he's going to be selling some slips for this knife, probably from Northwoods or one of the other leather makers for this knife if you really do want to carry it in a slip, and it also will work with any of your other Jack Wolf knife slips. But back to that plug. So it does include the plug, and one of the interesting things is you can see that this is numbered, and so it's going to match our pocket clip. So we have a DLC coded plug here for my DLC coded pocket clip, and the numbered versions are only going to come with the 3 covered models, so both the fat carbon options and the Kirinite option. The titanium options will not have a numbered plug, but they will still include the plug. The reason for that is the machining on the titanium is so precise that all of the plugs fit exactly the same. But with the cover options, it's a little bit less precise, and what he was finding was that generic plug would fit perfectly on some, but not so perfectly on others. He said it was a very, very minor thing. A lot of people probably wouldn't have noticed, but he's a perfectionist, wants to put out high quality, perfect knives, and so he sent it back and asked if they can grind each of the plugs to match the specific knife. And so this 451 goes with my model, which somewhere is numbered, I'm assuming either on the tube or maybe somewhere internally. I haven't seen the numbering, but this knife is number 451, and this plug goes with my specific model, meaning that we're gonna get a perfect fit every time. So really like that attention to detail. And if you lose your plug, he may have replacements, but it's not going to be perfectly matched to your knife. So I want to make sure when you're opening this, the plug is rolled into our cloth. And so don't let that drop, don't let it get lost, because it is matched to your specific knife. One other thing about the plugs, don't want to spend too much time on them, but one cool feature on the jigged titanium plug is that the plug itself is also jigged, and it's made to line up exactly with the jigging on the handle of the jigged titanium model. And so that means a seamless transition where you can't really tell where the handle ends and the plug begins. Really, really nice touch there as well. So yeah, overall, I think I'm probably going to leave my pocket clip. I've obviously left my pocket clip on the Gunslinger. Really, really like the detent on this one. Like I said, it's a little bit heavier on mine, which is very satisfying. It feels a little bit more stout and just strong and sturdy. Obviously, it's going to be about the same, but it does feel very, very nice. And the action on this is very nice. I may try out the skiff bearings, actually. I may order a pair for both if it is indeed the same, but absolutely love the look of this Kirinite. Huge fan. Now I do want to go into the packaging. We'll save that for last. Obviously already getting to be pretty up there in length on the video. As far as our microfiber cloth this time around, we got this gray and black one. Probably the coolest one yet. I love all the colors he was doing, and still excited about those different colors, but the gray colorway just looks incredible. It's just a cool one. Like I said, with the DLC coating, it just has a cool look to it. And then we get, and worth noting, you may get a different color. He puts them in batches, and so a lot of people are going to get this gray. As soon as it runs out, he's going to switch over to that next color. So if you don't get the gray, don't be surprised. We also get our POG, of course. You have had that on the table with the after hours jack in the background. Has the art on the front side of the POG. Really great artwork this time. We'll see it a little bit bigger when we get over to that tube, but love the POGs. Very nostalgic. Let's look at the tube and then we'll get into the sticker, as the sticker has a little bit of a different design than the tube this time around. So starting with the model name here, we have After Hours Jack in those neon lights. I think that looks really, really cool. And scrolling over, we have Jack in his nightwear with his drink of choice and a lady on his arm. Very, very cool artwork. This one's done by Sean Tiffany again, which we've seen on a lot of the other models, but not all of them. And so really nice artwork there. Did want to scroll over here where we find the socials, and wanted to point out that jackwolfknives.com/care. So mentioned, if you're going to be changing out your pocket clip, you need an instructional video. Those are on his site. They're also on there for other models. So not really advised to disassemble the slip joint models, but he does have instructional and care videos on the other models as well. And so really, really great tube. You can see that prominent Jack Wolf Knives logo right up top. Love the look of that as well. And let's look at the sticker. So we get two stickers as usual, and this is actually a different design art than the tube and the POG, and so wanted to look at that as well. This one is kind of a more, you know, outdoorsy. He's got his trench coat on, or leather jacket, whatever that is, and these really cool glasses, kind of almost Viper style glasses. One thing that I like about this, I don't know if this was intentional, but it seems to incorporate the colors of all of the different covers that we got this time around, and so cool kind of Easter egg on that sticker. And love that he gives two, because that means that I can slap one and save one. Don't have to feel bad about using it or making sure it's in the perfect place, because I have another one. Now, last note before we sign out of here is the pricing. So just like the Gunslinger Jack, the locking models are a little bit more expensive than the slip joint models. So these ones come in at $350, which is the same as what I paid for that Gunslinger Jack. So did want to point that out as well. But again, these are dropping December 15th, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific here in the States, and we'll link to everything down in the description. Would love to hear your thoughts on this knife, if you plan on picking one up, and if so, what cover option you're going to go with. Even if you're not picking one up, what's your favorite cover option? But thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking, commenting, subscribing, and hitting that notification button. As always, it helps out the channel a ton, and I hope you have a great one. Take care.